Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into leadership effectiveness, but, we aren't talking about optimizing quarterly reports today.
Right. Not the usual metrics.
No, we're focusing on something, well, surprisingly central and often overlooked when it comes to true authority, and that's the consistent, immediate act of obedience.
Mm,
The sources we've looked at, they're a mix of historical texts, theological frameworks, and even some modern strategic
a
analysis.
real blend, yeah.
And they all point to this core conflict that really determines whether a leader thrives or just, well, merely survives.
And what's that?
It's this. Most leaders, they don't fail because they lack intelligence or strategy or experience. They fail because they hesitate.
Ah, that moment of clarity.
Exactly. You get the direction, sometimes with this undeniable conviction, but then that tiny flicker of delay creeps in and it just erodes all the momentum.
And here's the uncomfortable truth that comes right out of this body of work. Delayed obedience, it quietly undermines and erodes authority long before anyone notices the external symptoms.
Right. And in these fast-moving, high-stakes environments, which, let's be honest, is every environment today, delayed obedience is functionally the same thing as outright disobedience.
It is. So our mission in this deep dive is to explore a concrete, practical framework. How do you turn that divine prompting into decisive, immediate action?
Understanding how this posture, this immediate, consistent obedience, isn't some restriction. It's a leadership multiplier, a real strategic advantage.
What's fascinating here is how this whole concept it forces a complete pivot from the traditional ego-driven leadership models we all know.
Mm.
The sources make a really compelling argument.
Mm.
Leaders who condition themselves to respond quickly, consistently, they aren't just, being virtuous.
No.
They're positioning themselves for inherent structural advantages. They become more effective, so much more resilient, and they align with outcomes that go far beyond what their intellect alone could ever generate.
Think about the pace of the modern world. It's
Yeah.
relentless.
Exactly. Speed and volatility mean that hesitation, that gap between knowing and doing it, carries a measurable, often catastrophic cost.
Totally. Leaders who rely solely on their own instinct or their intellect or past success, they hit these inevitable ceilings.
Right.
But the research suggests that those who cultivate this habit of obedient follow-through, those who navigate from a higher source of direction, they step into a realm of strategic resilience, a favor that just can't be manufactured by conventional means.
So the central tension we need to resolve for you, the listener, is really wrapped up in this key question the material keeps asking.
Which is?
What if the breakthrough, the alignment, the authority you've been praying for is actually waiting on the other side of an instruction you've been, intellectually examining and strategically postponing?
Oof. That's the challenge. And that's what we need to make actionable in this deep dive.
That tension is so palpable. That chasm between knowing what you should do and summoning the courage to actually choose to do it now, right now.
Yeah. And too often, obedience is kind of pushed into this soft discipline category, something fueled by emotion.
Mm.
But the source material is much sharper. It defines obedience as a hard strategic move. It's the decisive alignment of your limited authority with an unlimited source of favor and direction.
It transforms that paralyzing uncertainty into immediate direction.
Right. And it turns a calculated risk into an opportunity anchored by real principle. The foundational idea here is profound.
That obedience is the operating system.
It's the operating system of genuinely effective leadership. It's not one heroic moment of compliance. It's about consistency.
We see this with leaders all through history.
We do. Think about Joshua. His courage, his success, it was explicitly tied to his willingness to obey without deviating. Or Daniel, whose small daily acts of obedience.
Like refusing the king's food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or maintaining his prayer rhythm. Those small things positioned him for extraordinary influence when the critical moments arrived.
And this takes us directly into the framework the sources define. They call it the divine leadership blueprint.
The blueprint. Okay.
Yeah, and this blueprint, it's forged from three deeply interlocking, non-negotiable principles.
Let's hear them.
Okay, the first pillar is humility. This is the foundation. It's the full acceptance that divine wisdom inherently surpasses our human understanding.
It's that moment you say, my expertise is valuable, but it is not ultimate.
Precisely. The second is trust. That's the internal compass that lets a leader take decisive action even without seeing the whole outcome. And the third, which we'll need to spend a bit more time on, is actionable authority. This is the practical exercise of leadership. It's anchored in integrity, and it's aligned with the divine purpose.
And that's the key distinction, isn't it? Stewardship versus control.
That's the whole game, and obedience is the bridge that gets you there.
When we look at that story of Abraham, his entire trajectory hinged on immediate obedience. He was told to leave his home, his culture,
Everything's safe and familiar.
and just go. He didn't form a committee. He didn't run feasibility studies. He just obeyed immediately. And that action, it wasn't just faith. It was the catalyst that turned an abstract promise into a tangible generational reality.
And in a modern context, that's like, I don't know, selling your successful, stable company because you have this clear conviction to pivot into a totally new, untested, and much riskier market.
Right. So let's look closer at those first two pillars, humility and trust, because they're so countercultural in a business world that rewards certainty and control.
Deeply countercultural.
Humility is the soil where obedience grows. It requires surrendering that ego-driven desire to understand every single variable before you move.
The call is clear. Obedience is not conditional on your full intellectual understanding.
Proverbs 3.56 is basically a risk management strategy, right? Trust the ultimate source. Don't just lean on your own limited analysis.
And we see this amazing historical demonstration of humility as a strategic asset in the life of George Miller.
The 19th century leader, the orphanages in England.
That's him. He made a conscious decision based on deep conviction to trust God for every single need. He refused to solicit donations, refused to fundraise conventionally.
Which, from a conventional leadership perspective, sounds
Insane. It looks completely insane. But his humility, his willingness to depend absolutely on a source beyond his control, allowed him to act decisively yet dependently.
And the outcomes were just
Extraordinary. Visible. It proved that obedience rooted in dependent trust can exceed the results you'd get from the best human marketing or fundraising.
That's such a great example. And that humility feeds right into that second pillar, trust.
It has to.
Because trust demands raw courage. Acting on direction almost always means stepping into deep uncertainty, risking your reputation, your resources.
And your immediate comfort.
For sure. We see this courage so vividly in the story of Joshua crossing the Jordan River. The sources stress that when they got to the river, it was at flood stage.
Right. Impassable by any ordinary metric.
But Joshua's trust allowed him to act immediately. He commanded the priests to just step into the flowing water.
And the miracle, the parting of the waters, was the visible confirmation that came only after the decisive, seemingly impossible act of obedience had already started.
That's the part we always miss. The miracle follows the obedience.
Always.
Yeah.
And modern leaders face these exact same kinds of tests. You might have a decision that requires divesting from a popular but ethically questionable technology, or making a pivot that defies all conventional wisdom.
Right.
Immediate obedience in those moments means aligning your mindset with the source's timing, not just human expectations or the pressure of a quarterly report.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to talk about that third pillar. When you were laying out the framework, actionable authority, that felt the most abstract. Most of our listeners get humility and trust, but can you give a clearer sense of what the source material means by actionable authority? How do you know if you're exercising stewardship versus just asserting control?
That is the critical distinction. Actionable authority is the outcome of consistent obedience. When you operate out of control, your decisions are motivated by self-preservation, by ego, by fear of loss.
Okay.
When you operate out of stewardship, your decisions are motivated by integrity and alignment with the higher purpose you serve.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A leader asserting control might aggressively lobby against a necessary regulatory change because it threatens their market share this quarter. But a leader exercising actionable authority, one rooted in obedience, they'll pivot immediately. Maybe they even take a short-term financial hit because the clear direction, the conviction, is to serve the long-term good and maintain integrity.
So the authority isn't in their title.
No, it's in the consistency of their principled action.
Here's where it gets really interesting for your daily life. This whole deep dive is about moving this from an abstract idea into a working strategy.
Making it practical.
Exactly. Obedience has to become measurable and communal, and the source material gives specific, actionable tools for this.
Okay, let's get into those.
The first concept to really internalize is the discipline of consistency. We sometimes wait for a mountaintop revelation.
Right, the big moment.
But obedience isn't a single, spectacular decision. It's a disciplined lifestyle you cultivate in the small, unseen places. Daniel's example is so powerful.
It is.
His faithfulness in those minor, mundane acts like his diet, it built the spiritual and mental capacity he needed to respond with absolute boldness when he was facing the furnace. Small, consistent acts compound into massive influence.
And this brings us right to the practical toolkit, which is designed to embed obedience into your weekly rhythm.
Tool number 1.
Tool number 1 is the obedience audit. It's simple, but really effective. At the end of your week, you review 3 to 5 major decisions you made,
Okay.
and you apply a 3-point check.
Oh.
You ask yourself honestly,
Right.
was this decision motivated by my ego or reputation? Was it motivated by convenience or the path of least resistance? Or was it motivated by genuine obedience to a conviction I received?
Ooh, that's tough. It
Right.
forces you to acknowledge that misalignment.
It does. It prevents that slow drift toward just doing what's easy.
Okay, and tool number 2, which I find fascinating, is the scenario-based exercise.
This is basically leadership training for your spiritual reflexes.
Right. You don't wait for a crisis, you actively simulate pressure points. Imagine a sudden ethical crossroads or an unexpected financial threat.
You use these real-world scenarios as practice fields. You train your first response to default to God's instruction.
So you stop your stress response from defaulting to convenience or fear in the moment.
Exactly. And the third essential tool is the obedience tracker. This is a practical 3-column journal or log.
Okay, what are the columns?
You note the prompt you received, the clear direction, the action taken specifically, how fast and how you responded, and finally the outcome or the lesson learned.
So by tracking this, you build a demonstrable history of God's faithfulness, which in turn builds your courage for the next time.
Precisely. It transforms obedience from an abstract ideal into measurable, actionable growth that builds momentum week over week.
And crucially, the effectiveness of these is amplified by implementing a simple peer accountability rhythm.
The communal aspect. So important.
It is. You intentionally share one specific obedience action, whether it was a success or a struggle or a failure, each week with a trusted mentor or a peer.
And that simple act, it just accelerates learning, ensures you're not making these decisions in a vacuum, and it sustained the courage you need.
Especially when the instruction was personally challenging or, financially counterintuitive. We also have to spend a moment dismantling a major misconception that cripples a lot of leaders.
Which is?
That obedience should feel like effortless inspiration. The source clarifies that true obedience is not a sudden surge of feeling. It is discipline refined by consistency. And it's rigorously tested under pressure. It's often deeply uncomfortable.
That's absolutely right. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3. Their refusal to compromise, their unwillingness to bow before that golden image.
It wasn't a sudden burst of courage.
Not at all. It was the predictable product of disciplined faith that they had cultivated over years of minor acts of obedience in a hostile foreign land.
So their response shows that obedience is most authentic when it's costly.
Yes, when it's costly, countercultural, and requires principled resistance to pressure and expediency.
And this brings us back around to that actionable authority pillar.
It does. We see this principle so beautifully applied by Nehemiah, who rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. His leadership was just a masterclass in alignment.
He started with prayer. He sought guidance.
And then he acted immediately on the instructions he received, even when he was facing immense opposition. His authority was credible, not because of his political title.
But because it was visibly anchored in integrity, discernment, and alignment, he was the perfect steward. So if we connect this to the bigger picture and what you should be measuring, the source material argues that true leadership growth is measured less in external metrics like budgets or visibility.
And more in the consistency of your alignment with God's principles.
Right. Which demands a regular leadership audit. That kind of ruthless self-examination to make sure your daily routines and strategic decisions are mirroring God's values, not just, human agendas dressed up in pious language.
Ultimately, the source provides a clear conclusion. Obedience is a competitive advantage in a way that nothing else is.
How so?
It protects your integrity, which is your greatest asset. It radically simplifies decision-making by giving you clarity in the chaos. And most importantly, it unlocks possibilities that indecision or compromise or just intellectual arrogance would inevitably forfeit.
So we've established that hesitation is the silent killer of authority. And that immediate obedience, rooted in that triad of humility and trust, is the necessary foundation for effective leadership. The roadmap is clear for you.
Cultivate spiritual sensitivity to direction.
Choose to act immediately, regardless of comfort.
And use practical tools like the obedience tracker and accountability partnerships to embed and sustain that rhythm.
Remember this. Obedience is the mechanism that transforms an abstract vision into reality. It transforms personal surrender into actionable authority, and it converts quiet faith into tangible, enduring outcomes. That
Well, that the most brilliant strategy alone could never achieve.
it is, simply put, the highest form of leadership stewardship.
Which raises an important final question for you, the listener, as you synthesize the strategic framework we've unpacked today.
The source material repeatedly emphasizes the paradoxical nature of this discipline. It's both costly, it involves sacrifice, inconvenience, perceived risk.
And yet it's profoundly rewarding.
In blessing, in character formation, in deep alignment, to get there, you have to internalize your identity and seek approval in God's values, not an external validation from your peers or the marketplace.
So before you move on to your next task, ask yourself this. What long-standing assumptions about success or comfort or strategic influence might need to be completely released?
In order for you to lead in a way that reflects God's values and prioritizes immediate, costly, and consistent obedience.